Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writing Quest. My name is Brennan Pugh. In today's episode, we have Amber Toro here with us, and we're going to be talking to her about her book, her writing process. How are you doing today? And welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm doing great. Excited to
Awesome.
be here.
Perfect. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got started in writing, how you got to where you published your first book here, or I'm assuming you have some other writings too. So you can maybe tell us about some of that, and why don't you just give that rundown?
Sure. I'm Amber Toro. My day job is a data scientist, but like you said, I just released my first novel 2 months ago, and that is Umbra. And the way I got into writing, I actually always loved writing and telling stories since I was a little kid. Um, and I always wanted to write a book, but then, you get older and you have kids and life is really busy. And I took a break from reading and writing and all of it for a while. And a few years ago, I got back into reading. And then 2 years ago, my dad passed away suddenly. And it got me thinking, what would I regret not having done if I were to go right now? And so that's when I decided to, I had this idea for Umbra. That's when I decided to make the time to write it.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. That's really cool. I think that's a great thing to think about. Like, what would you regret not doing? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why? So it's a sci-fi book. Is there? Have you always been a sci-fi fan? Are you more of a fantasy fan? Like, how did you kind of land on the sci-fi stuff?
Yeah. I've always been a sci fi fan. I think, like most sci fi fans, I like fantasy also, but I was
Hmm.
very much a Star Wars kid. My parents also watched Star Trek. So, I mean, I grew up with both. And I always just liked the kind of fantastical element of what could be, right? What is a possible future? For me, it's a
Hmm.
lot like fantasy, but you can kind of ground it in what could actually happen. And I think that's really fun.
Yeah, yeah. So it's the idea of what's out there, what could like Star Wars and Star Trek are a great example of like just two different ways it could go. You know?
Yeah. And that's what I did with Umbra as well. It's supposed to be about 10,000 years in the future. And it is based on this concept of what if we did develop sentient AI, and if that AI was then developed to be individuals that were bonded with human hosts and lived their lifespan with a human host. And so that was kind of the concept that I started with. And so it is very much based on a possible, far future reality.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very relevant for our time, and we just spoke a little bit before about. I want to ask you a little bit about AI because you work in AI. Um, so how about can we get into some of your writing process? So you said you had this idea for quite a while. Did you do you like to outline a lot? Do you start with just kind of you wrote a few things and just kept writing? Like how did that process happen for you?
I lean a lot more towards the discovery writer side of the spectrum.
Mhm.
And so, in general, I'll start off and I'll know there's a couple of plot points I want to hit. But in general, then I just sit down with my characters and we figure out how we're going to get there. And so, for me, a lot of it is it just builds daily, right? So, once I get to this part of the story, then I take some time to think and how do we get to the next plot point or what happens next?
Yeah. Did you do a lot of world building beforehand? Because I'm guessing if it's based off of like future humans, but there's probably still quite a lot to figure out how the tech works and how all that kind of works in the story.
There is a lot of world building, but I don't know, I do still really lean towards the discovery writer side. So I did do a lot of research. I listened to probably like 5 books, like researching things that I wanted for the book, and I did have general concepts. I wanted to include cultural elements of Eastern culture and values. That's one of my characters, the male point of view. And then I wanted that to have a conflict with Western values and culture, and the actual tribes in the book were picked based on current space budgets. So the idea that if we did have an exodus from Earth, those who had large budgets right now would probably be the commanders of fleets. And so that's kind of how I separated the groups. So there is quite a bit, but I kind of do it while I'm writing also. It's not like a big thing I do up front. Again, I
Mhm.
kind of figure it out as I go.
Yeah, I think that no matter this is what happens to me is I like to outline, but also like no matter how much I outline as I'm writing, there's always something that's like, oh, this is a really cool thing, and then you have to go back and like add it back into everything. So I think like I've been leaning more towards I have a few ideas for some novellas of I'm probably gonna just not really outline those and just kind of discovery write it and see what happens. Um because I think both ways end up being your first draft essentially. Like if you do an
Yeah.
outline, it's really just a first draft that you just
Yep.
didn't write the prose for. So,
Yeah, I've heard it's basically deciding where you want to do more work. Do you want to do more work up front, or do you want to do more work on the back end, fixing whatever you didn't know because you just jumped in?
yeah. Well, and I think it matters too for like how you write. So I struggle to write if I don't have some idea of where I'm going because then I just kind of get very aimless really fast. So for me, it helps at least to know like I got to hit a few of these points to get me there.
Yeah, definitely. No, and I like that too, at least having a direction. But also, I don't know if I'd like a detailed outline because for me, part of the fun is like, I don't know, I'm surprised sometimes, right? I'm like, wow, where did that come from? And that's part
Hmm.
of the fun.
Do you find that your characters kind of all of a sudden they're kind of telling you the story? Because I've had that where I'm writing something and then all of a sudden I'm like, that's not really where I want to take it, but that is what that character would do. And so
Yep,
you just kind
sometimes
of go
they
with it
just take
anyways.
over. Yeah.
Hmm.
Like, all right, I didn't know that's what we were doing, but you know, that's what you want to do. So,
Yeah, that's
yep.
fun. I've only talked to one, maybe two. I think just one person who said that they don't want to know the ending. Like they just write, but most everyone says they kind of know like the how the end probably will be, at least to give them something to point at.
Yeah, I agree. I know where we're ending. It's kind of the stuff in between all the major plot points that, things can change.
Yeah. How long did it take you to write this book? Did it like I mean I know you said you started it before, but like when you really sat down to like I'm going to really do this, how long did that whole process take?
Yeah, so it took a while in the beginning because I didn't dedicate daily time to it. I noticed that is really where things changed for me. And so I would be like, it's all right, I'm gonna just think it through. And then I realized until I write down what I've already thought through, my brain like doesn't move on from that point. And so I just
Yeah.
like sit there. So it was NaNoWriMo that actually I started moving forward on it. I didn't get the 50K, I think I got 30K, but it was that daily or almost daily discipline of like sit down and work on it and think about it each day. And once I did NaNoWriMo, then I finished it June after that. So there's like quite a bit of time before that where it was really slow. But most of it was November to June. So
Yeah.
8 months. Yeah.
And then so kind of walk through the rest of the process. Like how did you find an editor? Did you go back and rewrite it yourself before you did that? Like did you have any beta readers, anything like that?
Yes, to all. So I did set the 7 drafts method. So I actually probably ended up with 13 drafts total that I worked on. And so it's basically start high level. So you work on the story structure, make sure everything's there that way, and then you work your way down. So you do character edits. I have 3 point of view characters, which means I read through it 3 times in the mind of each of those characters, being sure that they always behaved and spoke in a way that made sense for them. And then the like most granular, of course, you're getting down like to the line edits, and then the stuff I hate, which is the like agonizing over every word that made it on the final page.
Hmm.
But after I had gone through, I think it was right before my personal line edits, I went to betas, and I think I had 5 beta readers. That was super helpful. I think it's really great to see where things are landing the way you intended versus maybe didn't quite come through the way that you wanted it to, and you just tweak little things to be sure that the whole story is coming across the way that you wanted to. That was super helpful. And after betas, then it did go to an editor. I had an editor for the line edits, and then proofread.
Did you use did the editor have anything about the story, like any developmental editing, or just for the proofreading?
So my editor did a beta read. And so it wasn't developmental edits. It was, kind of the same level of engagement as my betas. So all of the development really happened with my drafts and then the beta read.
Yeah, nice. So, um, you have a family, mentioned them. So, how do you? I have a daughter as well. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and my wife, of course. And so, writing with kids can be very difficult. So, how do you kind of balance a lot of that? Being disciplined in doing it. How do you get your family on board? All those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's funny. I have a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old. So, like, similar stage. They're super fun. And actually, the really fun part about that age is they're pretty interested.
Hmm.
Um, so I actually wrote a novella for my daughter, and that was part of a anthology, a fall fantasy anthology. And she loved it. She cried. Like, she's like, this character's just like me. So like she's super into it. It was supposed to be a novella for my son. It's turned into a novel. And he's kind of frustrated because that means it takes more time before I fully finish it.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, he loves his story. He got to talk through it with me of like, oh, what should they do next, buddy? And that was pretty fun. And for Umbra, it's adult. They can't read it, but they have copies of every proofread or every proof copy that I've ever gotten. They're always so excited. I open the box and hand them their copy, and they're so funny. They're like, "You're the best writer ever." I'm like, "You've never read it, but like,
That's
I'm
really
glad
sweet
that
of
you
you,
love it."
but
Yeah.
yeah.
So just always, I mean, as far as them being on board, it's that of like they're involved in the process, and that makes it really exciting for them. In
Hmm.
regards to time, I try to just take time where I can get it. And I'm not super strict about when that is. So if it's in the morning, like everybody slept in and I'm awake, it's quiet, I can write, great. If it's like lunchtime is the moment when nobody needs me, then it's lunch. Like I just look for an opportunity most days where I can get a little time when nobody needs me and write. Sometimes it's while they're at swim practice on the bleachers. You just have to be flexible, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah, I keep my stuff like I have I've written in quite a few things, but currently I'm using Scrivener, and they have like the computer, iPad, and a phone version. So I
Oh, is there a
definitely
phone
do.
version?
There is a
I,
phone version, and
I need to get it.
yeah, I've absolutely like sat at swim lessons or something like that and just like typed on my, which is hilarious, but
Yep. I didn't know that. I always just open a Google Doc if I have to do it on the phone, and then I have to transfer it over to Scrivener when I get home. So I have
yeah,
to look at that.
it definitely doesn't have some of the, like, the one thing with the iPad and the phone versions is it's tough to like organize. Like you can't really, like on the computer you can kind of just drag documents around and move it, but
Yeah.
if you're just like I'm standing in line at, you know, the mall for food and you can like type down an idea or something. So
Yeah.
makes it kind of nice. Yeah, I think it's interesting with kids of like it really does fragment your time. Like when it, because you always hear the advice of like write every day, find a time that you can sit down and do it and stick to that and all that. But I'm like, once you do have kids, it kind of just like whenever you can
Yeah.
works the best, you know?
And I think if that works for you, right? Like some people are really good with really strict schedules, but I've tried that. I've tried being super organized with my time. It like stresses me out and it doesn't
Hmm.
help. And so it's more for me, it's about these are the key things I have to hit today. Do them when you can.
Yeah.
And that just, it's kind of like organized chaos. And that works
Mm.
pretty well for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty similar. I do work from home a lot, but I definitely find myself like some days I wake up really early and I work. Some days, and even for writing, it's like, or I'll write at night, or I'll write for lunch, or like, yeah, just whatever,
Yeah.
however the day flows based on what I've got to get done.
That's me too. I don't know. It
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the AI stuff. So you work in the AI field. So I'm interested in, I haven't asked anyone in a while. Before I say anything, what do you think about writers using AI, how they could use it? Like, what's kind of the path there, I guess?
Yeah, I think that one, I think there's a lot of gray. And so I think if we try to come at the conversation with this very black or white view, I think that we forget, or sometimes people forget, AI is already a part of your everyday life. Did you use Google today? You used AI, right?
Mm.
Most of the applications on your phone, there's it's really ubiquitous at this point. So I just want to be super clear that there's a lot of ethical applications for AI, and there's a lot of areas where AI does make life better. Now, what AI is good at that humans are not so good at is pattern recognition in big data. And that's what I do. I work in big data. And so when we're using AI to process large amounts of data and do things that humans are not very good at and often are bored and not fulfilled doing, then I think that's a great application. And so if we're talking about that, in the space of writing, I think things like if you use Grammarly to go through and spell check and check that you have the correct words in, and maybe it does a little bit of grammar, great. Now you have a much cleaner manuscript when you go to your editor, who should still, in my opinion, still be a human because one, by the way, I'm not very good at grammar. Like that is not my strong point. And so I've been researching on it, and I've noticed part of the problem with grammar is like even humans don't agree, right? So some of it is like you have to
Right.
know all the rules. Then you have to know which ones you're keeping and which ones you're breaking and why. And that's pretty nuanced, which is maybe something that's harder for an AI to do versus if you have
And
an editor that you have. Yeah, go ahead.
based on opinion. Like, it's nuanced,
Exactly.
and then depending on who you
Yes.
talk to, it could
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I totally agree.
Which is why I think having an editor who knows your voice, knows your intention, and knows how to use the rules that make sense for you, that's going to be a come through and be, I think, a lot better writing experience and a better reading experience for the reader, than if you are just going off of some rigid rules from an AI.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely don't. I don't see any issues using things like Grammarly and stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, spell check's been around forever, and it's just
Yep.
a more advanced version of that. Um, I struggle with when people are just straight up like using an AI to write all of the book, and the
I
only
agree.
reason
Yeah.
I don't really like, I guess, care per se. The only reason I think it is interesting is because if you want to be a writer, isn't the point to actually write, you know?
Yep. I
So if you're
agree.
just using the AI to like type all your prose, well then it's like why are you even doing it, you know?
And I think something to consider on the generative AI side. So that side where it is, let's say, writing the book for you, is thinking about how those algorithms are created. And those are created by feeding them tons of data from existing novels, right? Existing works. And that's how they learn. And one of the things that I'm curious about is if we did really go down this track of, all right, AI is going to do all our art, AI is going to do all our writing, humans are, we're not doing this anymore. I think that unless there are advances in the algorithms, we would stagnate because now they're only going off of the existing examples, and there's only going to be so many variations. Now that's a lot of variations. Don't get me wrong; it's a lot. It's big
Hmm.
data, but
Hmm.
I think that we would see that a lot of things kind of feel the same, and you're no longer going to see those moments where like, look, writing changed here, or look, art changed here because someone came in and thought about it differently.
Hmm.
And so I think that's something to consider as well, is if we want to keep seeing evolution in art, I think that at least at this point, comes from humans.
Yeah, the human side brings the innovation to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one way I've kind of experimented with it is like creating a custom chat GPT basically. And like I turn off the internet and I gave it like the rules are like it's not allowed to write anything. And then just giving it like my outlines and like stuff about um my characters and whatever to basically just be a reference guide for me. So like you said,
Oh,
like
yeah.
processing the data, like it's a lot of work for me to like go through it all and make sure but if I can be like,
Yeah.
hey, what does this character do in chapter 1,
Yeah,
you know? So that's
totally.
kind of how I've been experimenting with it. It's more like a research assistant, essentially.
Our CEO loves to put our meetings, like our recorded meetings, in ChatGPT and then get the outline and the takeaway and send it out to
Yeah.
everybody, which is like, it's that same type of thing, right? Where it's like, it's maybe just organizing everything that you have for you in a more digestible way. I think that's
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've yet to run into anyone in particular who's like they want to totally write their book with AI. Most people are, if they are using it, it's some kind of something like that or like Grammarly or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think people also still want to have a creator to connect to, you know. Um like part of the reason I like Lord of the Rings is because I also like J.R.R. Tolkien,
Yeah.
you know.
I
I
know.
like
It's
learning
nice
about
to see
his
the
life
human
and
behind. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
definitely. Awesome. So, this book is the first in a series. Uh, are you close on? Have you started on the new stuff? Do you have like how's that going?
So, book two is fully drafted, and I'm going through my first pass right now. So, yeah, book two is now in the editing phase. Book three, I think I know most of what is going to happen. Originally, it was going to be a trilogy. I actually haven't really talked about this yet, but it's going to be 4 books now. Just because as I've been writing it, there's 3 points of view. There is pretty deep world building, and all the threads I've introduced couldn't be wrapped up in 3 books without them being big. And I really like Umbra is 380 pages, like with all, the back matter and glossary and everything.
Mhm.
I like that size. Like, I don't really want to go much over that size if I can help it. I just feel like it's fun and digestible and not intimidating, which was important to me with my debut. And I'd like to keep the books like that, where they're just really fun to pick up and enjoy, and you're not looking at it like I need a full month because this thing is so big. So now it's planned at 4 books.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's a great thing to bring up. Of like what I don't think anyone's really concerned about like a long series anymore. I think long series are pretty like you get a lot of those. But I even for books that I really like, um the length of the book sometimes can be really like even if I really am liking it, it's still a lot to get through. I think about like Brandon Sanderson's books. Like I love a lot of his stuff, but I mean they're like 1,000 pages. I mean it's a lot of stuff to get through.
And that's why I haven't picked those ones up yet. Like, I've read Skyward and Steelheart and Mistborn, the first three. And the other
Hmm.
ones, some of them I'm like, when I have a little more time. Like, that's a commitment, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I read Way of Kings, which is the first of his Stormlight archive, which I think is like just right at 1,000 pages. And I mean, it took me a couple of months because I'd kind of go in spurts, I'd read like 300 pages, like you know, and then I would take a big break and then I'd jump
Yeah.
back in, you know. So I think that's really smart of you to be thinking about that. Like, how big do you actually want the book to read from the reader's perspective?
Yeah. And of course, I mean, the story is going to be what it's going to be, but that's my aim anyway. Of I want it to be something I'd want to pick up and read, and that it would just be fun.
Hmm. Yeah, I find myself when I do read a big book, I'll take those breaks and then I'll when I take a break, I'll pick up something that's shorter, like a 300-page
Yeah,
book, and read that just to give me like a little
I do that
break.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you have? Is this like a series you want to world like you want to keep building off of, or is it like you're going to write these 4 books and that's like it, and then you move on to something else?
Yes. So this is the one storyline, and I'm not really planning on necessarily doing more with these characters. But like I said, it's like there's 10,000 years of history and all, basically this whole universe that I've built. So I already have my next series idea set in this universe, but it'll be also totally different because that one's going to be science fantasy. So that should be fun, but also it'll still have kind of some of the elements from this world. The idea being just a different point in time and a different place in the universe.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
cool. Um, how do you? If you know you're going to be wanting to go to 4 books with this, we've kind of talked a little bit about this. Again, in regards to how you got started and wanting to finish this book, but how are you working on staying motivated and disciplined to keep writing them?
I don't know that it's hard, right? Like
Yeah.
I love these characters. Like, drafting is my favorite. So I was super excited to jump back in and get book 2 draft finished. That's honestly really fun. And it's like, even though I know in general how things are going to go, I want to finish it. Like, I want to know what's going to happen. So again, I just
Hmm.
keep those habits of I'm working on it most days. And that's the other thing I would say too. It's like, I'm not a strict everyday person. I feel like if you show up more days than not, then you're going to make progress. And so, yeah, it's not, I don't know, I haven't run into a motivation problem with it yet because I want to finish it for myself.
Yeah. I think that's
Yep.
important. Like writing a book that you yourself want to read is
Yep.
is really important, I think.
I think so too. Especially, okay, I didn't know this. I didn't know I was going to read it 13 times before I published it. So I
Yeah.
think it, like, when you think about it that way, it's like, if you're not going to enjoy it, reading it a dozen times, maybe that's not the story idea you chase after.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I
Yeah.
want to enjoy it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great I've heard of some people who kind of like they'll finish the draft and then they'll just be like super over it or something. And I'm like, I just don't feel that way. I get so excited like I finish it and then I'm like, I just either want to go back and reread it right away or I want to start on the next one or like something
Yeah.
like that. Like I get super pumped.
Me too, on the creation part. But when I'm over it is like the very final edits where I'm like, how is there still a typo here? Like, I just want you to
Yeah.
be clean and done. That's
Yeah.
what I'm over it, but it's more like I'm over the like nitty gritty editing, not the
Yeah.
story.
When
Yeah.
you've looked at it, like I've looked at this 1,000 times and
Yeah.
yet that comma is still in the wrong spot.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my I'm with you on that too about you said about like grammar's not your strong suit. Like the grammar and that like really nitty-gritty stuff, like I'm really gonna need a good editor for that because that's just not my like my strongest
Same.
point.
I just like the story, guys.
Yeah. I just
Yep.
love the story. I like the planning it out and writing the stuff and putting the scenes together and
Yep.
all that like detail stuff. I'm just gonna really need to hire that out because that's just not my that's not my favorite thing at all.
Same.
Yeah. Um, so what kind of advice would you give to like someone who's maybe starting out, maybe they have an idea, they've never written anything before, or maybe someone who has almost kind of done it and they want to continue, like what kind of advice would you give them? Like, is there like 2 or 3 different things that this is where I would start?
Yeah. I think I have a couple. So first, and this one was surprising to me, was find your community because when you sit down and you're writing, you're by yourself, and so you think it's a solo sport, and it is a team sport. I didn't realize how important it was to be part of the community, and I was lucky to already be a little bit in the community as an ARC reader. And so when I was really moving into talking about my book, it very naturally evolved that I found other people that were kind of in that stage. And by the way, that part is great. Like, being friends with people that are a little bit behind or ahead is also great, but people that are right where you are, it's nice. Like, you feel very seen, especially because it can be really stressful and really overwhelming. And to, know that you're not alone, like, yeah, it's just part of the process. There's a lot to that. And then also you need beta readers and you need people to bounce, ideas off of. And I just think it's super important to be a part of the community. Another one I would say is figure out what works for you. So kind of like we talked about with the schedule, like everyone has their own opinion on writing, on you should have a schedule or you should have an outline or you should do it this way. And it's like you can research all those things and then figure out what works for you. Don't feel like you don't have to do it one way if that's not working. Everybody is different, and that's why there are all of these opinions. And so I think it's super important just to figure out what works for you. And the last thing I'll say is just write. Um, I think a lot of people that I've talked to is they get too hung up, too in their head of maybe they don't know what to write or what they're going to say, or it's not good enough. When I draft, I don't edit at all, and I don't judge it at all. It is me telling the story. Nobody ever sees that very first draft except me. And I don't even fix typos. Like I'll go through and it's just full of typos, and maybe it's not exactly the way I'd want it to be, but I have the whole story there. And then when I read through it, it's pretty easy to make it sound good and to fix those little things. But there's a lot of people that they don't get started or they don't finish because they're so worried about making it good or making it right or making it perfect in that moment. And
Hmm.
some people do write really clean. And if that comes naturally to you, I think that's awesome. But I don't think that should keep you from telling your story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because you also you have the whole editing process. Like that's why
Yeah,
there is an editing process. And as we were saying before, like there's editors that you can hire. There's like so the idea of like it's got to be that perfect thing is, nothing is ever perfect when you first start it, whether it's music or art or it all takes a process to continually make it better.
yeah. And it'll never be perfect. That's also sometimes you have to know when to walk away, right? Because you keep learning
Hmm.
and you keep getting better. And it's like, yeah, your next book is probably going to be better than your last one because you learned stuff along the way. But you
Hmm.
just write the best story you can right now.
Yeah. There's a quote I love that I don't know who said it. I don't know where it came from. I just heard someone else say it. And basically it's that no art is ever finished, it's just abandoned. So like
I think I've
eventually
heard that too. Yeah.
you just have to stop working on it
Yeah.
at some point. Like you just
Yep.
work on it as long as you can and as long as it makes sense and then eventually you just have to because you'll always find something that you want to change or
Yep.
whatever. Yeah. Yeah, I think I love what you're saying there about like the community and being a part of it. And also everyone doing things a little differently. That's part of why I wanted to start reaching out to authors and having more conversations about it because just to give everyone's perspective, like everyone has such different perspectives on how to do things and why they do things that I think it's just important for other people wanting to write to hear all those different things of like there's so many ways to go about it that it's very easy to pick up like a writing book and read the whole thing and like that's like the tried and like you must do the way that they said.
Yep.
So that's what I just love having these conversations to like hear everyone's different processes.
I agree. I think that's really cool. And like you said, so I've read Stephen King's book on writing. Excellent, by the way, if anybody is looking for a craft book. Stephen King is a discovery writer, right? He says like it's like he's uncovering a fossil and he has to uncover it before, it kind of disappears. And he doesn't know where it's going to go. And that's, he's a hugely prolific writer. But right now I'm also listening to Brandon Sanderson's lectures on YouTube, and he really leans
So
more
good.
towards plotting, right?
Hmm.
Again, another just amazing author who it's like he has that whole thing plotted out before he goes in and writes the draft. They're
Yeah.
both right. They both work. They both write amazing stories. Um, and wildly different process.
Yeah. Yeah, those I always tell anyone I'm like if you want to write like watching Brandon Sanderson's lectures are a great place to start. Like he just
They're
talks about
so
so many
good.
great things.
Yeah.
My brother, he likes to write as well. And when he learned about Brandon Sanderson's kind of archetype stuff, so like where he basically like, if you have the hero archetype, they have these plot points. And if you have this type of, detective story, you have these plot points. And you just kind of intermix those. That like really clicked with him. Like he just was like, wow, that makes so much sense. And that's how he runs with things. But then, like you said, like Stephen King isn't wrong. Like everyone they're both very valid ways to go about things. It just I think it depends on who you are, and
Yep.
some people want more structure, some people don't, and that you both ways are okay.
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, like people, even people who aren't perfectionists, for some reason, when we start something like writing or art or whatever, we like all instantly turn into perfectionists, you
Or at least
know?
very
Although,
self-judgmental.
yeah, very like,
Yeah,
well, it's crap, and I'm not going to do that anymore. I just find that so fascinating.
it is interesting. Yep.
Yeah,
We should all probably be just a little kinder to ourselves while we're creating because,
yeah,
yeah, it's a whole process.
yeah. I will say, having started to, I suppose, jump into the community of writers and been reaching out to people on Instagram and Twitter and all that kind of stuff, everyone is so supportive of, like, no one
Yeah.
is competing with themselves. And I think that's really cool.
It is a really nice community. Like, I think it's a lot nicer and a lot more open and welcome than I ever expected. I really think it's really just about finding your people. Like,
Hmm.
as far as like where you spend your time, but yeah, everybody's super nice and willing to help out or point you in the right direction. I don't know. It's a really cool space.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for anyone who is like nervous about that, just jump in. Like, just start. I've yet to like message someone and have them just be like either super mean or totally turn me down. Like, everyone has been super cool. So I would just say that for anyone of like, if you want to ask a question of someone, just message them and ask. Most people will answer.
I agree. And I will say, I would caveat that with like being respectful and building relationships. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, just that would be my one caveat.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So maybe we could talk about this. Now, this could potentially be controversial. So you just, if you don't want to talk about it, you tell me. As far as like kind of current trends in media, current trends in books, perhaps, are there trends you like, things you don't like? Like, are maybe particular than book space? Like, I guess there's a lot of, I think, so I'll take Star Wars, for example. Lots of craziness about Star Wars right now. Some people love it, some people hate it. What are your thoughts about stuff like that?
It's a very broad question.
Yeah.
One, I think everybody should love what they love. And I think that we're not all going to love the same things. And I think that's where maybe some of the conflict you see is if something's really popular, um, people maybe expect their friends to also like it. And it's like they don't have to. And you could still be friends. And you could still
Hmm.
have books that you both enjoy, and you can have books that you're like, that wasn't for me. I'm glad you liked it. And you can see it in the ratings. Okay, one of my favorite series is Red Rising. Okay,
Hmm.
you go and look at the ratings there, and you go look up the 1-star ratings. It's like this is like one of my favorite books of all time. You see people that hated that book, like they
Hmm.
don't understand why people liked it. That's okay. Like that book was not for them. It wasn't the story for them. That's why there are so many different books and stories and writers. We don't have to all agree.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that even about like things like the classic stuff like Lord of the Rings and that have been around forever, like there's so many people that don't like that stuff either, and that's fine too. It doesn't have to be for everyone.
Yeah. To be
Yeah.
fair, this is something I saw that was interesting. If some of those classics were published today, they would probably not be as popular as they are because
Hmm.
of the pacing and the style and the way things have changed. And so if you
Yeah.
think about it in that context, it's like, yeah, I mean, so like I loved The Hobbit. That was one of my favorite books growing up. Um, but if that was released today, a lot of people that are younger audiences and used to things that are faster paced, maybe they wouldn't like it, right?
Hmm.
Trends change, and those books have been out for a long time, and they're classics for a reason. You could see
Hmm.
why some people that like maybe a little bit more modern style of writing that doesn't click with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too. It's definitely like trends changing is another thing that's important. Of like, you need to write the story that you want to write,
Yeah.
because if you try to follow like this is the a popular style or this is a popular genre or whatever, I think that's just effort and futility. Like you're just not gonna. You may never be able to catch that. Very low chance. So you're better off just writing a story that's like, this is the story I want to tell.
Yeah, for sure. Also, I don't think it sounds very fun. Like,
Yeah.
if you're trying to just, fit into this framework because it's popular, but it doesn't really speak to you, I don't know. Especially when you consider how many hours go into making a book. I think that's
Hmm.
something I didn't think about when I was, working on my book, of like, especially all the hours that come after you draft it. But obviously, there's a lot that goes into drafting too. And it's like, you want to spend all that time on something you're not having fun with? I don't
Hmm.
personally.
Yeah. Which kind of pairs well with like writing a book you want to read. Like
Yep.
if you aren't going to like it at the end, then why would you even write it? You know?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Did you um so this kind of goes into this. You self-published this book. Did you attempt to do a traditional publishing thing? Did you do any querying, or did you just decide like you wanted to self-publish and that's the route you were going to go?
So I initially thought I was going to try traditional. And when I was doing my research, I just didn't feel right about it. And the more I learned, the more I didn't feel comfortable with going traditional. There's several reasons for that. But the biggest thing is honestly, like I poured my soul into this book. And actually, bigger fear than it being rejected, which who cares, then you can just self publish it, would be that somebody bought it that didn't believe in it as much as I did.
Mm,
And I've seen some friends that have gone traditional that their books got shelved because they wouldn't make the changes that were requested. I've seen some that have covers that really don't reflect how good the story is. Um, and so that just all made me really nervous. Like if it didn't get published because they wanted me to make changes I wasn't comfortable with, that would crush me. If the cover didn't help sell the book because, it's sci-fi and they didn't want to put money into it, that would crush me. And so I decided I didn't think anybody would believe in it as much as I would. And so
hmm
I wanted to do everything and do everything the way, do everything right. Do the cover I wanted, build the arc team I wanted, and just give it the support that I would want it to get.
hmm
And I know that everybody's experience is different. And maybe if I tried querying it, it would have been an awesome experience. But just kind of the unknown side of it, I didn't feel comfortable with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people are starting to not like the idea of like a publisher kind of gatekeeping them. Like what you said, like, you're going to have a small group of people at this publishing house that decide your book maybe isn't good enough, as opposed to like continuing to try and find the audience.
Yeah.
Because someone out there will like it, someone out there, there is an audience for the book, but if someone at a publishing house decides, this one's maybe not it, well, then you just have that one person's opinion killed your killed your book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah. And that's hard. And it's hard because the reality is, like you said, it comes down to that marketing message and testing and figuring out how do you speak to the people that are going to like this book. And if your first book doesn't launch well traditional, that can kill the support for the rest of the series.
Hmm.
Um, versus, if you self-publish and maybe you didn't nail your marketing message, you can keep tweaking it and find the audience and be sure that you continue to get strong support as you release the series. And then that was the other side. If I had a standalone, I might try querying, but with it being a series, that makes it, again, it's more scary and it's harder to sell a
Hmm.
series as a debut. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think I don't know, I kind of learned some of that through doing YouTube now for a few years. And you probably speak to this too with having done lots of social media. You just keep kind of looking for the audience. You just keep like with YouTube videos, like you just keep changing the YouTube videos, you keep adjusting what you're doing, you change your thumbnails, you keep going. And eventually you find all those people one by one. And so I think it lends itself to allowing you to be persistent longer over time.
yes. Yeah, I think you nailed it. That's exactly it. If you believe in it and you're willing to do the work, like you said, test it, test your messaging, test what you're talking about. find the people that this resonates with. But it's just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's testing and time.
So the flip side of that, though, I love your thoughts on this, would be how do you make sure though that you're not being like totally delusional? Because there's that part too where it's like
Yeah.
you may think it's great, but what if it like how do you I guess make sure that you believe in it and it is actually great, you know?
Yeah. I think some of it is proof of concept stuff, right? So I guess with my book, I had over 100 ARC readers. So I was able to get at least 100 people interested in this debut author who knows what I'm going to put out. Um, and most of them read it and left a review. And most of the reviews are good. So that's a pretty
Mhm.
strong proof of concept that there is a market, that there are people there that like this story and will want to read this story. And so in that case, then also I'll go through the reviews and I'll look for trends. So if you start seeing these same comps over and over again, those are good comps to use in your marketing. If you start seeing these same things that, people loved the relationships, they love the different point of views, they love the slow burn. Those are things for the marketing then, because people who like those types of stories are the ones that are going to like your story. So I think it's that. I mean, first you have to try a few things and see if you can bring some people in, right? Get people interested, and
Mhm.
then test the things that people liked. And I think if you do all of that, it's hard to say though, because timing in the marketplace also matters. Maybe it's good and maybe it is not the time in the market for your story. Maybe the
Mhm.
time where your story is going to blow up is next year or in 5 years because your concept is just not on trend now, but it's on trend in a year. So it's hard to say that you should give up on it necessarily,
Mhm.
but I think I would say on that line, it's not that you would give up on it, but just work on the next project, right?
Yeah.
Um, and if you get people interested in the next project, there's going to be, if they really like you, bleed over to your old projects, and maybe that's how it gets going.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said about proof of concept. I think that is a great like even with your beta readers, you said you had 5 beta readers, so it's like if all 5 of them came back to you and were like, "This is really not good," then that'd be a
Yeah,
very strong like indication to you of like,
you got to
okay, we got
take
to
it
work on
back.
some things. Yeah,
Yeah,
but if they're all like, if 4 out of the 5 are fairly happy, then you're like, okay, we're
yeah,
on a good path. And then you get your 100 arc readers, and if 80 of those are positive, then it's like, okay, we're on a good path. And yeah, it's kind of just keep rolling it out to
yeah,
bigger and bigger groups.
yeah. I'm big on, well, because of the data background, I'm big on trends, right?
Hmm.
So the same thing with people not liking it. Let's say there's a lot of people that didn't like it, and they all didn't like this one type of thing. And it's like, well, then that is not the story for them, right?
Hmm.
Or if it's like a story element, or maybe it's something you need to work on and improve in your writing.
Yeah.
But yeah, just focusing on where the trends are because everyone has a different opinion. You'll see reviews where people are like, I hated all the characters in this book. And other people are like, I love all the characters in this book. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, it's not necessarily the characters are bad. It's not the right characters for maybe some readers. So I don't know. You
Yeah.
have to just be thoughtful in what you take away from your
Hmm.
analysis, I guess.
Well, and you're not going to make everyone happy. I mean,
No,
you'll never convince 100% of people to like what you wrote. So,
no,
I guess that's a great thing. A question is how do you deal with some of that? Like, I'm sure you've gotten some comments or something where someone just totally hated it. How do you kind of handle that kind of pressure, I
yeah.
suppose?
One, it's hard because we're all humans. I think that's hard for everyone. But I think also it's like it's understanding when is it something you need to work on versus when is it this was not the right story for someone.
Hmm.
And something to keep in mind that just drives me nuts is your brain is going to put more importance on negative things than positive things. And I mean,
Hmm.
that's, a self preservation mechanism. But I know I just did a reel on reviews since I just hit 100 reviews or ratings on Goodreads. And when I was going through it, I was like, oh, I forgot how much people love this story, right?
Yeah.
Because those like did not stick in my head as strongly. Like, I mean, I loved them when I read them and I love them, right? But it's like they don't stick in your head. But like somebody will make one comment of something they didn't like in your story, and you're going to remember that. Um,
Yeah.
at least that's how I feel. And I'm like, man, is it something I did? Right. And
Hmm.
that's when you have to take it back and be like, well, and you have to assess, is it something I should work on to improve for the next book? Or was this not the right story for that person? And then that's
Hmm.
how you decide. If it wasn't the right story for them, that's okay. And you have to let it go. If it's something that you're like, oh, okay, I could do that better in the next book, then walk away with that.
Hmm. Yeah, that happens to me a lot, especially when I first started doing YouTube. Is you get that one comment on a video that's like, you should stop doing this and you're
Oh
terrible,
my
and then so
gosh.
your whole like brain is just like maybe they're right, like you
Right.
have that moment. But it's definitely like then I have to look back and be like, oh, there's still like a few
Yeah.
thousand people on here that are not saying that, you
Yeah.
know.
That they
So
actually enjoy what I'm doing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And then the
it's
other
never
thing to
fun.
consider, how many people are not telling you, right? How many people are watching
Hmm.
your YouTube or reading your book and they're like, this brightened my day, or I love this, or I learned something new, or whatever. And they're
Hmm.
not going to rate you or follow you or anything. But you still made an
Yeah,
impact on that person. And that's actually most, by the way, is most people don't rate or review or speak up. So I think that's something to remember too.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. I would fall in that camp of like if I leave a if I read or watch a movie or something and don't like it, I like 99% of the time will not. I won't leave any kind of rating. If I do like it, maybe 50% of the time I'll leave a rating. Like,
Yep.
but I would agree with you. Like most people, like they watch or read or something and they go, eh, or they love it. But either way, they don't nope, they don't take the time to do it. So I 100% I agree with you that like for every for every one rating out there for someone who loved it, there's hundreds more of people who liked it that just didn't leave the rating.
Yep. In fact, I was actually surprised how many people that's such a thing that they don't do, because in this community we do, right? Because we know it's important for
Hmm.
authors. But the casual reader, some of them, they don't even know how, right? Like I've heard
Hmm.
that from some of my author friends. They'll be like, oh, I love, somebody will message them and be like, I loved your book, and they'll be like, oh, great, would you mind leaving a rating? And they're like, oh, I have no idea how to do that. um
Yeah.
and that tells you, and it's not just your book or not just your, whatever you're doing. It's like a lot of people don't do that in general. That's not part of
Hmm.
their, part of what they do. And so I don't know, something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even if you look at like on Amazon where you see the star rating, or if you look on Rotten Tomatoes for the rating for the audience score, it's like there's maybe what on a really massive movie you might have 1,000 ratings
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
movie that makes like a
Millions of
billion
people have seen
dollar,
it.
like so
Yeah.
much money. So it's like 1,000 people out of the millions who saw it left a rating.
Yeah.
With the book, it's like you just hit 100 readers. Well, how many? You haven't had only 100 readers. You've had a bunch of readers and only 100 people left the rating.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome. Well, it has been great talking to you. It's been fun. We're coming up on an hour, but if you had any final advice, any last little nugget of truth to give people, what would it be?
putting me on the spot. I think it's just, if you want to do something, so if you want to write the book, go write the book. Most people don't finish, which means if you at least start, then you're ahead of, and by the way, most people don't start. If you start, you're ahead of everybody else who hasn't started. And if you finish, you're already ahead of most people. So if you want to do something, just get going and don't judge yourself. Just jump in.
Yeah, awesome. Well, where can we find you? Where can we find you on socials? All that stuff. Where can we find you at?
Yeah, I am Amber Ray Toro. It's Ray spelled RAE across all socials. And my website is ambertoro.com.
Awesome. Well, and I'll put all that stuff in the description, so there'll be links and stuff for people to check out your books and all that kind of stuff. Thank you so much for being here. This has been really fun Thanks everyone for watching. This has been Writing Quest, and we will see you next time.